lovely to see so many of you here this morning, especially when it's so hot as well, although I think we kind of escaping that in King's Manor this morning. Welcome to the York Festival of Ideas event, Steeple Chasing Around Britain by Church. My name is Laura Yeoman. I am an archivist at the Norfolk Institute for Archives at the University of York, and it is my pleasure to be chairing the session this morning. So, my great pleasure to introduce Peter Ross. So Peter is a freelance journalist based in Glasgow. He has written for titles including The Guardian, The Sunday Times, The Times, National Geographic Traveller, Scotland on Sunday and the Boston Review. He is a 9 times winner of the Scottish Press Awards and an Orwell Fellow. He's published multiple books, including A Tomb with a View, The Stories and Glories of Graveyards, which won the Non-Fiction Prize at Scotland's National Book Awards in 2021, and was a BBC Radio 4 Book of the Week in February 2023. Today he'll be sharing the tales of our country's churches, and through them a story of Britain, one that is much about people as of place. What we're going to do is Peter's going to open the session with a flavour from the book, so he's going to give you a reading to give you an idea of what it's all about. Then we're going to have a bit of a conversation, and then we're going to open the floor to your questions as well. Okay, so Peter, I will hand over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Laura. Just as Laura said, it's really great that so many of you came out today, especially given that it's so sunny. We're both Scottish, so I think we're quite glad to be indoors in our rightful place, trying to maintain this power. So I'm going to read you just from the very start of the book, which is a chapter called Darkness. Basically, this bit will allow the book to introduce itself to you better than I can sum up, I think. It's going to take me about 10 minutes to read this, and about 2/3 of the way through, I have to sing a little bit in Latin. And because and I don't speak Latin, and I can't sing, so I kind of feel there probably are people in this room who can do both those things, so if you can just bear with me during those fragile moments. Okay, so this is from Darkness. It was the hour of the owl, the hour of the men who wear the cowl, and the church was in deep winter dark. A monk ghosted in, a white shape in the blackness, a shape that took on greater definition as he lit the tall candles on the altar. His hood was up, his face shadowed, but his quick, precise movement suggested that this was the young novice, Brother Edmund. Bells rang out with an urgent clang, which meant that 2 other monks, out of sight in the north transept, were pulling long ropes that disappeared up into the tower, calling their brethren to praise. It was 6 in the morning on the 8th of December 2020, the feast of the Immaculate Conception, the day of the first COVID vaccination, a moment, it seemed, of answered prayers. Hoskerden Abbey, in the northeast of Scotland, is a rare survivor, one of very few medieval monasteries in Britain still used for their original purpose. It is home to 18 monks. The youngest are in their early 20s, but most are a good bit older, the eldest being in his 80s. They are Benedictines. They wear white robes. They are obedient, chaste, and poor. It is likely that most will see out their lives here and be buried in the Abbey cemetery. The grave markers, simple wooden crosses, wear so thick a pelt of lichen that the intrigued visitor must trace with a finger the furred letters in order to make out this carved epitaph. After life's fit fever, he slept well. Now, if life is a fever, Hoskerden is immune. Its natural resistance built up over centuries of isolation. There's a rare stillness here, a sense of physical separation and temporal slippage. The nearest town, Elgin, is 6 miles and several centuries away. The abbey is at the foot of steep fields with a palisade of firs at the top. Hill and woods are a looming wall, keeping the monks in, the world out. Lockdown has long been a way of life here. I had arrived the day before, driving for 4 hours from my home in Glasgow. Freezing fog, ice on the moors, snow on the peaks, a last bend in the road, and there, suddenly, was the great ancient building. "Welcome," Father Giles had said on answering the door, "to this distant and uncivilized place." Why had I come? I was at the start of a pilgrimage of sorts. I meant to go steeplechasing, to wander from county to county, story to story, church to church. The UK had lately sickened and been much shaken. It seemed possible that it might come apart, that we all might. In William Golding's 1964 novel, The Spire, a vertigo-inducing account of the construction of a cathedral on shallow foundations, one character observes that life itself is a rickety building. The book is set in medieval England, but those words seemed, when I encountered them, to speak to our present sense of fragility. Rickety old Britain, one hard wind from the fall. I had grown tired of the present, with its anger and fear and lies. I was losing faith in the future. I wanted to delve into our deep past, to be buttressed and braced by history. A close examination of churches and the customs associated with them offered, it seemed, a chance to reconnect with who we were, reconsider who we are, and rediscover who we are, and reconsider who we might yet be. The world, I thought, would look better through stained glass eyes. Churches are all around us. They remain landmarks in our towns, villages, and cities, even as their influence and authority has waned. A map of churches is a treasure map. They contain art and architectural wonders, and might be regarded as one great hoard scattered like a handful of jewels across these isles. People once loved and feared churches as they loved and feared God. Now, often, they fear for them, fear that they'll fall down, fear that they'll be converted into offices and flats. Do they still love them? They should, even if you only attend churches for marriages, baptisms, and funerals. Isn't that enough? These are among the most important times of our lives, moments when we speak most deeply of ourselves, our love, our hope, our sadness. Churches hold within them Britain's history, national and personal. That smell they have, it's not just damp and dust, but faith and time. My own steeplechasing began with my baptism at Viewfield Parish Church in Stirling, where my parents had married the year before. It was the start of a long connection with that Victorian building on its vertiginous hill. I attended Sunday school there in an implausible kilt. It's so implausible I can't even say those words. And learned to recite the titles of the Old Testament. The commuter train rhythm of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus made me understand that words could be music. In memories of those long childhood Sundays, the Bible is mixed up with the Beatles and the Couthie comic strip memories, the Couthie comic strip adventures of the Bruins, marmalade skies, geely pieces, darkness on the face of the deep. As the years passed, as life scythed its scars, I left the church, but churches never quite left me. For those of us who were brought up with them as worshipper or visitor, those grey walls and hard pews are in our souls. For those born homesick for the past, churches offer the consolation of homecoming. And so, as I grew older, I found myself drawn back, not to pray or praise necessarily, but to sit for a bit, to poke around, to get in out of the rain. And I began to appreciate the wisdom of John Betjeman's words. Church crawling is the richest of pleasures. It leads you to the remotest and quietest country. It introduces you to the history of England in stone and wood and glass, which is always truer than what you read in books. It became my habit from time to time to visit Govan Old Church on the south bank of the Clyde, where I'd spend a while with the hogback gravestones and the stone sarcophagus thought to have held the body of a Pictish king. Whenever I was in Whitby, I would visit the cliff-top church of St Mary the Virgin, which lately has grown so popular with tourists that a sign has been placed on the door advising visitors to please stop asking for directions to Dracula's grave. Then, a few years ago, a month after my father's death, I travelled for the first time to Pluscarden Abbey. I'd gone there on assignment for a newspaper, but found that it brought me a peace that I hadn't felt for many weeks. I left far lighter than I'd come. Was this a religious experience? I don't know. Perhaps it was just being forced to spend long hours sitting quiet. It kind of gets inside you. The silences, sings Linda Perhacs in her beautiful song, Chinook Rain. And old churches are like that. You're entering a building, but really it's entering you. The Latin chant drifted through the dim church in a soft, lapping murmur. Tidal, it flowed and ebbed, flowed and ebbed. The white-robed men bowing, now rising, now bowing once more, caught in the sublime surf of their song. Deus miseriatur nostri et benedicat nobis. This was Psalm 66, always sung as part of Laud's morning praise. Laud's begins at 6:15 a.m. In summer, the sky might be pink through the great arched windows, but now, so late in the year, it was still dark. An owl had called a neighbourly greeting as I walked from the retreat house to the church. Later, the sun risen, I would see pheasants swaggering through the cemetery, ducal plumage bright in the weak winter light. The third of Pluscarden's characteristic birds is the jackdaw. They have lived around the abbey for centuries, their bones appearing in the archaeological record. With dark hooves and harsh jabber, the jackdaws seem shadow versions of the monks. They're opposite in many ways, although some of the brethren have, when they sing, the same bright eyes. The singing one hears at Pluscarden is much the same as it would have been heard at the time of its foundation in 1230. Indeed, the music was already centuries old by then. There may only be 18 monks in the church now, but there are hundreds in a line stretching back through the generations, and they are somehow in the music too. It's not an echo, it's the same song. The first written document of chant, of Gregorian chant, musical notation, comes from manuscripts dating from the 9th century. It's likely to have had a long period of development as an oral culture, spreading across Europe from voice to ear, choir to choir. And although it was functional, a vehicle for the praise of God, it must surely have been thrilling in a world without recorded music, to sing and to hear. Listening to it remains a remarkable experience. I sat for hours in one of the small chapels kept open for public use. The monks took their places in choir stalls below the east window, facing one another. First, one side would sing a verse, and then the other would take the next. There's no sense in which their singing is a performance. It's not especially loud and in no way flash. It's about as showy as waves lapping the shore, or the breath of a body in sleep. It has that sort of rhythm. Inhalation, not elation. Exhalation, not exaltation. It's gentle, patient, insistent, human. One monk, I noticed, had a cold and kept having to blow his nose. Another yawned widely. A third seemed troubled by his back. None of this detracted from music. The opposite. Here were songs of human frailty being sung by frail humans. The text was hard to follow, but that didn't matter. The intent was clear. These were songs for and from the dark times, tunes to sing to, words to cling to. They were 1,000 years old and ever new. It's 6:31 a.m., just around the time the monks were singing, Laetent et exultent gentes, let the nations be glad and exult. 90-year-old Margaret Keenan from Coventry became the first person in the world to receive the Pfizer COVID-19 injection as part of the mass vaccination programme. A little later, Brother Michael, the Abbey organist, stood at the lectern and said, We pray for an end to the pandemic. We especially pray that the poorest nations may receive the assistance they require to vaccinate and protect their most vulnerable citizens. It was jarring, if welcome, to hear the affairs of the contemporary world referenced in the midst of the ancient rite. A reminder, though, that these Benedictines are present in 3 zones at once: the deep past, the here and now, and eternity. The air smelled of incense as the monks processed out. The sun was up. A military jet passed overhead with a sound of rolling thunder. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. I think that really does set the scene. I think you'll agree for what your book's about. I absolutely loved the book, and I promised people I'm actually from Elgin, and it's not because of that I absolutely love the book. It's by sheer coincidence that I'm actually chairing this event this morning. But there are so many things we can talk about in the book. We could be here for hours, and I think what we'll manage to do in the rest of this session is maybe scratch the surface a bit. So I think what your reading really tells us is that the book's not necessarily a religious book. It's about buildings, it's about people, and it's about your travel writing as well. So you've kind of touched on this as well, but I kind of want to start with just a general question of why churches, why this book, what appealed?
Yeah, I might just begin actually just by addressing that specific point about it not being a religious book, if that's okay. I think that's important to say. I'm very careful in the book not to say whether I have a religious faith or not. I know I say in that bit that I left the church, but churches never left me. I mean that I kind of left the Church of Scotland. I wouldn't consider myself to be a sort of member of the Church of Scotland. But I don't say whether I have any kind of belief or not. And the reason I do that is I don't want it to be a distraction for people reading the book. I feel like I want this book to be a book for people who do have a Christian faith, but also for people who have some other faith or no faith at all. I think it's really important that it's kind of inclusive in that way, but also written with a tremendous respect for people who do have a religious faith. But in terms of why churches, in some ways it's a sort of natural follow-on from the book that I previously wrote, which is about graveyards and cemeteries and burial grounds, A Tool with a View. Both, I think, have a sense of the possibility of, or an interest in the idea of some other world, or something bigger beyond our own world, something that people believe in. And I think graveyards and cemeteries are often very beautiful, especially when they're a bit run down. And I kind of feel the same about churches. I think I always think of gravestones, graveyards as being like a library of the dead, and the individual stones as being like the individual books through which you can maybe read the story. I think churches are more like a sort of ancient manuscript, which are with kind of rubbings out and overwriting and things like that. So it seemed like a natural follow-on from the previous book. But also there was a specific thing, which was that I was doing research for my book, A Tool with a View, and I was down in Norfolk, in King's Lynn, interviewing a man called Julian Litton, who's like an authority on funeral customs. And someone said to me, if you're in King's Lynn, you must drive just a few miles south, because you go to the village of Stowbardle. There's something there that you won't want to miss. And this is a little church in the countryside in Stowbardle. I don't know if anyone has been there to the Holy Trinity Stowbardle, but there's a side chapel, which is where all the members of the local nobility, the Hare family, are buried for centuries going back. And at the very far end of that chapel was a mahogany cabinet. It's always kept closed, but never locked. And in there, if you walk down to the end of the chapel, you open up the cabinet, you see the wax effigy of Sarah Hare, who died in the 18th century. Apparently, she kind of got blood poisoning from pricking her finger with a needle, apparently. But she left instructions in her will that her likeness should be made in wax and set up in a cabinet above her grave in perpetuity. And she's wearing, it's an absolutely, I mean, she looks, it's incredibly lifelike, but also really, really unsettling. She's wearing like a kind of crimson cloak, and her hair, the hair is kind of ringlets falling over her forehead, dark ringlets. It's her own hair apparently, cut off at her death and put on this thing. It's a bit like Miss Havisham, but also meets kind of Don't Look Now.
There is a photograph in the book as well, isn't there? There is a photograph for those of you who get the book.
I should tell you what page that's on so you can skip it. But I mean, there's nothing in the church to tell you that that's there. So if you did walk down there and just happen to nosily look inside the cabinet, I honestly think you might fall down dead. But anyway, I saw that and I thought, wow, that's amazing. But something made me not put that into the graveyard book, to hold on to it as a little. And I think that's where the acorn that this book kind of grew from, in a sense, that I thought there must be amazing stuff in churches around the country, so I really set out to find it.
That's brilliant, yes. There is, you might need to skip the photograph as well, if I'm honest. That was one that genuinely terrified me. I think as well, you've got a really good selection of church buildings in this book. So we've got everything from big cathedrals to small parish churches, wells under Glastonbury Tor. How did you actually go about working out what to include?
Yeah, I mean, it was a mixture of things. I mean, I had a good look at all the sort of standard guidebooks on the subject, so we've looked through, go back, the John Betjeman books, and more modern kind of gazetteers like the Simon Jenkins book and so on. I would have a look at those. And so I identified a number of churches that interested me personally. But the point about this book is it isn't really a guidebook. So it isn't going to be me saying, here's a church that here's the most beautiful church in Somerset, I must include that. It's more like, where can I find an interesting building, but I can also tell a human present tense story. So, for example, I can give you an example of that thinking. I became really interested in fonts. Often the font is the oldest thing in the church. The church may have been kind of rebuilt and remodeled, but the font remains. So you get some fonts that date from kind of around the sort of just after the Norman conquest. Some of them are said to be Saxon. It's not very clear. So you've got this really, really ancient object, which is still being used often for the purpose for which it was created. And the object itself is fascinating because often the carving on them has got a style which is, it looks sort of Anglo-Saxon, but also a little bit Scandinavian. So it definitely seems quite alien, I think, to our eyes, almost quite modernist in a way, because it's so old. So I became fascinated by those objects, and I wanted to go and have a look at some of them and write about them, because they thrilled me just as pieces of art. But I didn't want to just go look at these fonts, folks. I wanted to try to tell that story about them still being used for baptism now. So I had to try and find a church that was going to be having a baptism, and then I had to try and persuade the family to allow me to go to their child's baptism. And I did do that. There's a bit, it's in a chapter called Stone, and it's about the baptism of a little girl called Clemmy Hartshorn in a church in North Grimston in Yorkshire. It's got this incredible font. Just an amazingly moving thing, I think, to be able to go and see that done in a font where children were being baptised just after the Norman conquest, where people that spoke a different language from us, they had an entirely different experience of life, and yet, no doubt, their parents felt some of the same things that her parents felt for that child. So the same say love and kind of hope for that child's future, and because they had a deep Christian faith, that mum and dad, that sense of bringing that child into the church as well. So that's really how I picked. I'm trying to find interesting places, but connect it to stuff that's happening now, really, the places that still have meaning.
I think that's one of the things that I find really interesting is when we read your book, we see your travels and your experiences of these places and of these churches, but yet we also get somebody else's perspective. I'm assuming that was something that was important to you when you were writing it, that you did bring that in and had these additional...
Yeah, I mean, as a sort of journalist and author, it's really always been important to me to try to get other people's voices into the things that I write. I don't really like the sorts of travel books, or rather any sort of non-fiction books, where it's just like somebody walking around being dry about things, just like that sort of thing. I like what they had for breakfast and all that. I much prefer it to be about the people that you encounter, and it just makes it more interesting to read. I think to have other people's stories and other people's voices in there, which is why it's slightly artificial me coming here and talking about myself, because the book isn't really like that. It's much. I hope it's a kind of open and generous thing, and it gives you a sense of the people of the country.
Yeah, I really like that, and you've done that similar in your previous book as well.
Yeah. I just made things difficult for myself, basically.
I'll go and find some buildings, then I'll go and find some people to go and talk about the buildings that I'm going to go and see. Yeah, but it worked really, really well. So you mentioned in the start of your reading that was December 2020. So obviously you've been researching the book through a pandemic, or through the latter half, through 2021 in particular. I think it's 18 months that the book takes us through to summer 2022. I'm assuming that changed some of your encounters with these buildings. There's a great passage in there about you visiting the Shrine of St Cuthbert in Durham Cathedral, but because of the restrictions it's actually really quiet, and we assume Durham to be really, really busy and like loads of tourists. So I was wondering how the COVID pandemic maybe altered your experiences, for the better or for worse actually, in terms of your research.
Yeah, I mean I began researching the book in something like May 2020, so really just in the right early days of the pandemic. And when I say research, I mean in terms of being at my desk, working like that, and sort of planning it and working out where I might go and what I might include. And of course at that point, we had no idea how long it would last, and there was no vaccine, and so everything was uncertain. It was difficult to plan. So the book did inevitably change quite a lot in terms of what was in it as I went along, because a lot of things got cancelled, and it was obviously at one point impossible, and then difficult to travel, and hard to kind of meet people and so on. And then there was what you're sort of getting at there, which is the experience of kind of being in those places at a time like that. Once we were able to travel a bit again, but things there were still a lot of restrictions. So I do think there's something about empty churches or going to churches on your own that's particularly important in this book, but also it's a sort of feeling I have generally. I should say, by the way, that the action of the book, if I can put it that way, it kind of begins in midwinter 2020 and it ends in midsummer 2022. So it covers a period where we kind of emerge from lockdowns and pandemics. So it's a kind of movement in the book from darkness to light, from midwinter to midsummer, sort of literally and I think metaphorically. And I think the tone of the book lifts as it hopefully lifts as it goes along. But yeah, I think there's something about going into a church, an empty church, as so many of them are these days, especially when you're alone, that allows you to experience something of the best of that church. So I do think that when you walk into a church, often what you feel is a sensory experience, isn't it? Often what you kind of feel is, you can smell that smell that they have, which is a mixture of dust and damp and of a sprinkling of bat droppings, I think, in there, and old prayer books and things. But also, I think what you can feel, I believe, is especially in very old churches, that people have kind of come into that building for such a long time, feel strong emotions. So my whole thing about churches is that I'm not saying that they're important because they're the house of God. I'm not making that claim. I'm saying that they're important because for centuries people have believed that they're the house of God. And therefore, they've come to them feeling moments of love, moments of grief, moments of despair, moments when they're looking for hope. And I think that the stones somehow have absorbed that. So when we kind of walk into an old church now, especially when we come along and are receptive to these things, that's what we feel. We feel the accumulated ache of human experience. And so I think that because I was going in the early stages in particular to churches, particularly big spaces like Durham Cathedral and St Paul's Cathedral, that are normally absolutely heaving with people, but you're in there with hardly anyone in there, you feel those things even more intensely than you would normally. So I think some of that has kind of got into the book, yeah.
Lovely. You introduced me in the book to the term church crawling.
Yeah.
And I started reading and going, this is definitely not me, and I kept reading and was like, oh hang on, this really is me. It's like, yes, I will accept that, I am a church crawler. In some respects you've been the ultimate church crawler in this, because you've done so many buildings and so many different types of buildings. This is probably an evil question, but of the kind of architectural features, we've talked Anglo-Scandinavian fonts, we've talked sailor hair, there's murals in there, there's some amazing angel roofs in there, hammer beam roofs. Is there something, aside from sailor hair, where you walked into church and went, wow, that's just the epitome of what I'm, like, that's just the best thing I've ever seen?
Yeah, that is quite an evil question.
Yeah, I quite like that one. Yeah.
Well,
It's like having to make you choose, because there's a huge array in the book as well.
yeah, I'm going to strategically pause by asking if anyone would consider themselves to be a church crawler. Then you own that term here, yeah. Okay. Oh, look at that.
Nice, not bad. And the rest just haven't been converted yet.
I mean, we did think about, I think church crawling was like an early working title for the book, but we were telling Steeple chasing it sounded a bit more dynamic, perhaps. For people that aren't church crawlers, we thought church crawler might sound a bit too sedate, whereas obviously everyone here knows it's really exciting and a thrill. I mean, in terms of like, the thing about writing a book is you kind of forget what's in it. So I really did love the angel roofs in Norfolk. Again, I don't know if people know, but most of the surviving, most of the angel roofs, basically wooden angels that are carved into the ends of beams and the roofs of churches, and most of them are in Norfolk, Suffolk and Cambridgeshire, I think. And they've survived the Reformation because they were so hard to get at, essentially. So while like stained glass would be smashed and silver plate stolen and wood screens torn down, those angels outlasted the Reformation because they were really difficult to get at. They're even now quite difficult to see. You know, if you go to visit those churches, because they're quite high up, you should take binoculars to have a good look at them. But there's one church in particular called St Peter's in the village of Upwell, where they later built in some galleries into the church in the 19th century, which means you can get much closer to the angels than you would normally be able to. And there's even one that you're probably not meant to be, you can, and I did, touch its face, which was an incredible thing to do, because again, it was like a period when we were still meant to be social distancing and stuff, so I hadn't actually touched anyone other than my own immediate family for such a long time, and then it just felt quite transgressive to kind of reach a hand up and just stroke the oaken cheek of this figure that had been carved in the 14th century, 15th century, something like that. I can't remember now without checking. So that was a really special thing. You know, those angel roofs they're masterpieces of English art and architecture, really, aren't they? And they're a little bit hidden as well because of where they are. I love the idea that these things were trees, and the master carpenters sort of could see those forms within the trees. So yeah, that was a beautiful one. I mean, there's so many. I mean, it's hard to pick just one, but I did find that a very beautiful experience.
Yeah, that was a cool question, because there are lots of different types of artworks and murals and fonts in the book. It's just amazing seeing you go through and identify these things. We've done Sarah here, but something, I think for the purposes of time, we won't do a reading on it, but you did visit York with the book.
Yeah.
You came to Bar Convent.
Yeah.
And there's a section in there on relics as well, and
Yeah.
it sounds like you had a really interesting experience. I have to admit, I've been to the Bar Convent more than once, and I have not seen the hand of Margaret Clitheroe, but you had the opportunity to actually experience that. What was that like?
I mean, yeah, it was good. I decided that I wanted to have a chapter in the book on holy relics, as you say, because I think, I want there to be a sense. I want there to be a sense in the book of what a variety. We're going from one subject to another. It's not all just here's a beautiful church, here's another beautiful church. It's different things. So there's a chapter called Bone, which is about holy relics, and as part of that, I go to Belfast and climb the hill, the mountain of Slemish. On the day before St Patrick's Day with the priest who is in charge of the relic of St Patrick that is kept in the church there and is brought out on St Patrick's Day, put inside this incredible 17th century silver gilt reliquary and sort of used to bless people. So I went there with him and had a look at the little sliver of what's allegedly, who knows, but allegedly the sliver of St Patrick's bone. But then I also came to York and visited the Bar Convent, which I really found extraordinary. Have most people been to that? Do you know it?
If not, I would advise going. It's a really worth a visit.
It's just, it looks like a Georgian house from outside, and that was on purpose. It was kind of built to look like an ordinary house, but it contains within it this secret chapel where people would celebrate Mass at a time when that was forbidden. It's got lots of exits, so they could get away quickly. And they also keep within it the mummified hand. I guess it's mummified, or it's kind of embalmed, or of St Margaret Clitheroe, who was pressed to death underneath weights on the Ouse Bridge in, I think, 1586. I think that's right. Her body was taken away and secretly buried, but somehow a priest that she knew managed to find the body and remove one of the hands, which is kept inside this kind of, it's almost like a bell jar with sort of silver fronds over the top. And it's not on display all the time, but you can ask politely and they'll show it to you. I mean, you can probably go from here now and look at the hand. That sounds like a good day out to me. It was just amazing to sort of see that, really. Yeah, I mean, it's just like I say, these places are full of strange and wonderful things. It's not all kumbaya.
I think that's the thing. You've kind of got that juxtaposition of talking to people in the 21st century about these objects, but actually then what you've got is a physical sign of something that's actually recognisable from the 16th century in a case as well. One of the things that the book covers really quite well is the issue of dwindling congregations and what's happening to churches, and you talk to the Friends of Friendless Churches, and we have the Churches Conservation Trust manage a lot of buildings in York City Centre as well. There seems to be a good theme in your book about kind of evolution and that these churches need to keep evolving. Why do you think that's important, that we still have these buildings and they are evolving?
Well, because I think that they are important buildings for some of the reasons that I've touched on. These are spaces that contain a lot of our kind of collective and personal histories. And they've often got important things within them, or are themselves important architectural spaces. And of course, they are still, as well as being used for worship, although in smaller numbers, they are, of course, often got kind of community uses. I mean, one of the bits in the book is I go to the Church of St Martin in the Fields, which is the church next to Trafalgar Square in London. The one's got sort of Greek, goes to kind of Greek temple, doesn't it really? And they historically have been involved in helping homeless people. And going back, if you read Charles Dickens, he writes about encountering homeless people in church down the steps of St Martin in the Fields. George Orwell writes the same in his hot picking diary. He writes about that. and even now they continue to do that. So I spent a day working in the soup kitchen there, effectively bringing food to people that had kind of come to Britain as asylum seekers or migrants of some kind or another who don't have any recourse to public funds. Some in the fields feeds them and gives them clothing and so on. So there's all that kind of utilitarian aspect to it, and charitable aspect. But I think just as spaces, they're really important. And it's a worry, of course, what's happening, because in order for the building to be kept open and to be kept standing, that relies upon money from the local parishioners. You know, it's from the collection plate and donations and so on that makes that happen. It's not from centralised funding from the Church of England or from the government. Whereas in France, the state funds all churches over a certain age. I think it might be before 1906 or something like that. I can't remember exactly. It's in the book. I don't think that's a perfect system, but they obviously are recognising the fact that these are culturally important places. So yeah, I mean, I do worry about them, and that issue has been accelerated by the pandemic, because attendances on a Sunday were already on the steep slide, and that's become much steeper since then. So I think one person said that we're approaching the apocalypse. That's how he puts it. And obviously they're given to that kind of language. Yeah. But it certainly is a moment of crisis. So I felt like I was kind of seeing churches, at a difficult moment. I felt like I was maybe coming in possibly at the end of something. I'm very attracted as a writer to the elegiac, to things that are a little bit frail, and I certainly felt that with the churches that I encountered. But yet, also very moved by the fact that people are turning up and kind of keeping them going. Not just worshippers, but people that don't have any kind of religious faith, who maybe go and ring the bells, or they clean, or they arrange the flowers, or they play the organ. Even if they're not believers, they're believers in the place where they live, and they understand that this place has been important to them, to their community for a long time, and they don't want to see it shut down on their watch.
I've got so many further questions. We haven't even got to cats and bats yet.
Oh yeah.
But yes, thank you everybody for attending today's event. Be sure to check out what the next few days have in store for the festival programme as well, because it runs the rest of this week. But before everybody goes, can we just give Peter a fantastic round of applause?